Hello and welcome to the Scotland Rugby News pod with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison, and we are joined by two folk that are really good at typing. Editor extraordinaire, Mr. Gavin Harper is with us, and we have the one and the only author of soon to be the best-selling sports book in the world ever, the one and the only Rob Robertson. How are you, Rob?
I'm marvellous, Bruce. Great to see you both. This is a gratuitous plug. I think you can see it there. I'll put the plate down.
Yeah, it looks pretty heavy.
It's
So
very heavy, Bruce. Very heavy.
come on then, talk us through it. The book. This is Murrayfield. When did that idea come into the head?
It came in my head, Bruce, 3 years ago, or at least 3 years ago, when I realised it was the 100th anniversary of Murrayfield next year. I thought, somebody's going to do a book on the history of Murrayfield. Why not me? That was exactly my thoughts. And I must admit, I was surprised I'm the only one who came up with the idea. I thought it'd be others. So I've been working on it since then, on and off. It's been a labour of love. It's been a lot of hard work. And the good thing is, I'm old enough to remember most of these games, which was good, up to a certain age.
And some of the 1925.
Exactly, that's right, 1925 to 1930. So I remember most of these games. That they all resonate with me a bit. Back when I had hair. All in saying that, I'm not doing too bad with you three today. It's a meeting of Where's the Comb, but never mind. But it was a great. It was great doing it. And what was even better, Bruce, was looking through the pictures that my co-author Pete Burns found. As Gavin, who's seen the book, would testify, the pictures are absolutely terrific. It takes you back to a bygone age when rugby was amateur and we all thought it was better. When in reality, if you look at games now, you think to yourself, no, it wasn't. It was just madness. It was just more madness and maybe more fun. But it certainly wasn't any better in terms of technical skill. But it looked better. The shots were shorter and the tackles were more ferocious.
And the shorts had pockets and were tied
So they
with
did,
string.
yes.
And so were your socks tied. Anyway, I'll start romanticising. Now, one of the things, the pictures and the descriptions, you're writing about games where there wasn't social media, internet. A lot of the games were maybe on live TV, but if you didn't watch it live, you didn't see it.
No.
So the romance of these things, well, for me, and I think guys like us, the romance of this and Murrayfield, meet under the clock, the trains, that meeting the same folk because you weren't on the phone to them all the time. You didn't have WhatsApp groups. You met them at the internationals and then you didn't see them again. There's a lot more than just what happened between the whistles.
That's it, Bruce. It creates memories. That used to be a great line by every Scotland coach ever. Let's create memories. But it did for the fans. It really did for the fans. They met in certain places. You'd go, I'm sure Gavin yourself went to certain pubs on certain days, saw your same friends, got drunk, woke up, compared stories the next morning. It was great. I mean, you maybe both disagree with me or you might agree with me. I think it's lost a wee bit of its allure just now because it's maybe not quite the full rugby clientele, let's say, or people whose love is rugby. A lot of people maybe they treat it maybe like the boat race or Henley. It's a day out for them, whereas the three of us would go and watch the rugby. The fact on Saturday against Fiji, one of my pet hates in life is the Mexican wave. And whenever that happens, my heart sinks. And I was saying to myself, please,
Amen.
No.
Amen.
You've joined the right chat, Rob.
No, don't do this. Do not do this. And what happens, it's Scotland are winning. And it wasn't a boring game in terms of lots of scores. So, it's changed. I mean, maybe you guys could tell. I can't remember. Well, in fact, I'm older, so the Mexican way was probably not invented when I was younger. But, it doesn't have that atmosphere that it used to have. But conversely, it's safer and it's a good place to take kids. I remember, as both of you probably will, standing on the terrace and not feeling scared or worried. Oh, sorry, Gav is saying he doesn't.
How old do you think I am,
Gav's, I can't believe Gav. He's one of the few folk that had a harder paper round than I did, Gav.
Sorry, Gav. I thought it was still. I don't know when that finished, but anyway, whenever it did, but you never felt scared. It's not like maybe doing that at a football match, and the atmosphere was terrific. And up to date, the atmosphere in certain games now is terrific. one of the games in the book is the 2017 game against the All Blacks. Doddy Weir comes on, and I was in the press box, and another one of my pet hates is people in the press box cheering loudly at international matches or club matches. You're allowed to do that at Edinburgh matches, Bruce, you're the compere. But I just hate it. But that's the only time I've ever been up when Stuart Hogg nearly scored in the corner. Bowden Ballock came from nowhere, or at least I didn't see him, to push Stuart Hogg out the bench. I thought, this is history. I'm here for history. Scotland are going to win this. Of course, they didn't. But, you know, it's moments like that you remember, guys. I mean, can I maybe even ask you guys, I mean, starting with Gav, I mean, what's your best Murrayfield memory? And then Bruce?
Best Murrayfield memory is difficult. I think there are so many different memories. Like, I remember 98, the game that's in the book for 98 is the game against Portugal.
Yeah.
And I remember being...
hang on. Hold the bus.
He is that old. I told you he was that old.
And I can remember...
You're going to pull Scotland-Portugal at the bag for one of the best games at
No, finish. Come on, Gav, you tell us.
I'm not going to pull it out of the bag for one of the best
dig
games.
Dig it out of the hole.
But it's one of the first games I can remember being at.
Wow.
And thinking, all right, okay, this is Scotland, and so but best, and then after that they went on and I think
99 Five Nations.
And then 99 Five Nations. The win against Ireland, I think, probably stands out. Then 2000 Calcutta Cup win.
Nicol and Hodge.
Yeah, Duncan Hodge and Andy Nicol lifting the trophy in the pouring rain. Right. I think there was 2018, the England game, because we hadn't won the Calcutta Cup for 10 years. Loads, but I think loads of games that create different memories.
Yes.
That 2017 game, like, I think when Doddy brought the ball out is the most emotional I've ever felt Murrayfield.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think you're right, Gav. I totally agree with you.
The atmosphere at the start of that game was absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I remember again being in the press box for that, being like totally gutted. Like, we were all just fans trying to sort of get our heads around what had just happened, as you said, Rob, when Bowden Barrett scythed Hoggy down, because I think we all thought that was it. We were there to be part of that history. Go on, Bruce. What are some of yours? You can remember 1925 Grand Slam.
That was a good one.
I'm just trying to work out if A, you didn't hear Rob's question, or B, you're going into politics, because you gave about 25 games there, and they asked for you. Come on, man. Come on.
Gav, I'm wondering what, Bruce, because I know this. I wonder if, Bruce, is it a game you watched, or is it a game at Murrayfield you coached in as your favourite?
Yes, coaching there. Unfortunately, I didn't think any of the games made your book, Rob. So maybe you'll need a sequel.
It came close.
But like you said before, right? Murrayfield, for me, I could sit there and watch the grass grow. Like, I just love being there, because it's like Field of Dreams. Like, there's ghosts there. I can picture things and I can feel things. So growing up in Stow, you didn't have rugby, because there wasn't enough folk. So we played football, and you didn't get rugby until you went to the academy. So, but we had an incredible head teacher at Stow Primary School, a guy called Derek Jones, sadly no longer with us, but he gave us so many opportunities. And Scottish Borders Council used to have yellow minibuses. And these were the days, talking about safety. These minibuses just had two benches down the side of the minibuses. They didn't have seats facing forward. And if Mr. Jones had to do an emergency stop, you all sort of concertinaed up the front, and you took your Wall's ice cream packed lunchbox with your boiled ham sandwiches and brown sauce and your bottle of soda stream. And you always parked at the same bit. That's now you can't park it because it's got student flats on it. You walk through the wee play part, and you got there. And as a wee lad for Stow who had supported Hibs, I was used to sporting misery. But my first game was Scotland against Ireland in '89, And then my next game was the 2 games where we won the Grand Slam. So I watched them beat France, and then I watched them beat Scotland. And it was one of those things, as a wee lad, you had old folk going, didn't get used to this, son. Didn't get used to this, son. It's no always like this. Didn't get used to this, son. But that game, Mr. Jones, you weren't allowed on the pitch. But when we won, he let us go on the dead ball area, and we were all picking up bits of grass, blades of grass to take home with us, because he'd let us on the pitch. And Rob, you and I have spoken this before. Like, we just had a bit of romancing about the terracing. I'm old enough to have sat on the schoolboy benches. Imagine if you called them schoolboy benches. Now you get hung, drawn, and quartered. But the other thing we're old enough to remember, at the end of the game, there was a pitch invasion. 50,000 folks spilled onto the turf. Like, that's ludicrous.
Never going to
but
happen.
Magic.
It's never
magic.
It's funny you say that, Bruce, because I met Gregor Townsend for a coffee, and his first memory of Murrayfield is just the same as yours. But his PE teacher was Rob Moffat, who went on to do great things for Edinburgh, and he was saying exactly the same thing. Minibus, Rob Moffat driving. They just literally, Rob Moffat would just dump them in the childhood enclosure, and Rob would go with his mates somewhere else, and he'd say, "I'll meet you back at the minibus." No mobile phones, no nothing. It's just
but Moff, when the World Cup came, and this is, I mean, schools have changed. You know, we're getting into Grandpa Aitchison here, but we went to every World Cup game. So we missed school to get on a double-decker bus. The school hired a double-decker bus, and by that stage, I could probably find the program somewhere, and it would have been struggling to be 10 quid a ticket for a school kid to go £1 for a program. And we watched everybody. We watched every game of the World Cup and lost the semi-final. And to have a World Cup so accessible, like I don't know if I was in the World Cup in France because my mate Sean got me a ticket, but ticket prices now are insane. And the thought of taking a double-decker bus of school kids to Murrayfield is madness now. Absolute madness. But it's safe. You said that before. It's safe. Folk knew, you know, it was one of those ones, if you got lost, you would just say, "Hey, mister, can you help me find?" And it probably would have just happened. Geez, I've got the rose-tinted specs on tonight, eh?
But I think that's a good point, Bruce, because like without 2 things, I definitely wouldn't have pursued rugby as first a hobby and then a job. I think without the Six Nations or the Five Nations as it was on the BBC and Bill McLaren's commentary, I wouldn't have ever thought, right, one day I want to either watch rugby or do something involved with this game as a job. And I think the second part is the access to Five Nations and then Six Nations tickets through my club.
Yeah.
You know, all the games, like all those games that I was talking about, 98 against Portugal, like we were lucky enough to be one of 6 people in the stadium because nobody else wanted tickets, and they were obviously getting rid of them through the clubs.
Was that Haddington you were through, Gav?
Yeah, it was all through Haddington. So, you know, I can remember us early morning down to the club on the bus, away into town, you know, bus full of kids going, and some of them, you know, wouldn't have gone to Murrayfield otherwise. And I think,
but the clubs sat together because your allocation was on the same spot. So although you might have found your own way there, you were socialising with the folk that you socialised with every Saturday, and that community feel to it was incredible. And a lot of the folk who were at the games were members of clubs.
Yeah, also as well, and just got to wind you up a wee bit here, Bruce. The launch that you snubbed, the book launch that you snubbed off this book. The one thing people were saying to me that you know, it must.
They were saying, "Where's Bruce?"
No, they were saying it's great having Gavin Hastings. You must be great having Gavin Hastings, Jim Rennick, Andy Irvine, Gregor Townsend all at the launch, and it was. But I don't know how Gavin felt, but I think he felt the same as me. Probably the highlight for me, and he's Johnny McFarlane, a friend, was on the pitch as well, was just being on the Murrayfield, not on the pitch, you weren't allowed that, but just in the stadium, in the darkness. It was just something magical that there was nobody else there. You know, and it's just when you're talking, Bruce, about the ghosts there, at night it was so tranquil. It was just something really, really special. I don't know if Gav
Totally.
It was just, mate, we'll never get that chance again, Gav. It was never going to get a chance at that time of night, and it was great.
Couldn't agree anymore. I think, we obviously had the chance to do some pictures at Murrayfield of you with the book, and I think being in the stadium during the days is great, and it's one thing. And we were lucky enough to get our feet on the grass. Like, I remember Bruce's tale about lifting the grass off the dead ball. We were lucky at Haddington. We were invited to be part of, I think there was a commemorative game against the Barbarians a few years ago. And
Van der Vesthuizen played on that.
Yeah, and so did Jonah, and like it was a star-studded, like the old days of the Babas. And we were on the pitch at half-time, and like I remember going home and being like, right, have I got any Murrayfield turf on my trainers? So like there's loads of wee memories like that. But I think like to be in the stadium, with Rob and Johnny McFarlane, the head of sport at Newsquest, like just the three of us, nobody else about, in the dark at night. Like there's just something magical about it. It's just an incredible place. And like I said, we said this on the night, Rob, but there is something about a stadium in the dark, either after it's all happened or before it's all about to unfold, that just feels different.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It was an amazing place. And, the whole evening, it was great. Can I actually throw at you guys as well? What's the best, you might have to think about this, your best individual performance you've seen there from a Scotland player or a opposition player? I'm asking you guys first, because I've no thought about that question either. So luckily, I'm going to come into this last.
Yeah, Bruce, you can go first. That's a really good question.
It is, which I don't have an answer for. I'm leaning back thinking about it.
I don't know if there's a whole performance, because we've spoken about this already. It's moments. So, Finlay Calder, 1990, just tearing in. Gavin Hastings missing a kick. There's moments that spring, and it's like if you try and pick an all-time team, there's the most recent bias of. But like Gav mentioning there, Bill McLaren. Like this is probably not true, but if Bill McLaren was commentating, I think I would be quite happy not to be there.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
The downside to being there was you didn't get Bill's commentary. Nowadays you would have an earpiece in and you'd be selecting the Bill McLaren commentary. Like that would be the best of both worlds, to be there live and listen to Bill, because there's so many moments. But I think, I don't know if I'm definitely not answering your question, but the kind of person or the kind of thing I like to see was Gary Armstrong.
Yeah,
because I'm not really old enough to have seen Roy Laidlaw in the flesh, but somebody like, if I had to hold up a Scotland player, I would say Gary Armstrong, because he was everything I love. He was a gnarly little, he would have given everything and done pretty much anything to get into that. Now, there's a lot of folk like that. And then that kick, Gavin, that Greg Laidlaw kick when the game was won and Greg was kicking that, I don't think I've ever seen. It wasn't an arrogance.
That against the Ireland one from the touchline.
Yeah. And it was like we were able to celebrate and massively enjoy that. But when like talking moments like Gav on about moments of nighttime and thing, I still want, and it's respect the kicker. I love the silence before a kick.
That doesn't always happen now, though, Bruce, even at Murrayfield.
No, and it doesn't. And I get it's entertainment and yada, yada, and they're professionals and whatever. But it's the theatre of 67,500 folk shutting up and focusing on one guy lining up a kick that's actually one of the most meaningless things in the world. But it's that theatre. It's amazing. And you hear the thud. And then the noise, I love that. So individual performance, I'm not sure I've got one. I think with my crystal ball, Finn Russell against the Springboks, November 2024. when we beat the double world champions, and he scores 21 points and back heels the ball over the line for Darcy Graham to score in the corner.
Then you woke up.
Aye.
Gav, what about you?
Do you know, it's interesting. I'm racking my brains to think about like great individual performances. I think somebody like in a time when Scotland didn't win virtually at all, I think it's somebody that I've spoken to you about before, Rob, but somebody like the 2006 game when we beat France, like Jason White was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
You know, and he really led that team from in everything that he did. I think that's one that springs to mind. Greg Laidlaw of the sort of 2016 to 18 team is another who you think, well, you know, in the big games, he was never far away from being like your top performer. Opposition teams, I think all the times I saw Lomu at Murrayfield, you know, he was just incredible. Whether that was playing for the Barbarians or for the All Blacks. More recent, I'm probably struggling, but
do you know, I loved when Scotland scored that try after about 12 seconds when when they did the switch kick.
John Leslie against Wales.
And is that still the fastest try in world
rugby? It is, yeah. Still the fastest try.
Because that was just one of those wonderful moments. Do you know the folk who I wouldn't let back into Murrayfield are the folk that leave early? I think that leaving early winds me up. But the other bit to this, so when my youngest, she thought she wanted to get into rugby and she went to Rugby Tots, and we went to Murrayfield for their first international. They'd been to Edinburgh Games and they'd been to international, and they were like, "You know everybody here, Daddy?" And I was like, "I don't, but I know a lot of folk." And then we rounded a corner and we bumped into Johnny Else, who used to coach Edinburgh Accies, good guy, Boroughmuir, good guy. His wee boy went to the same Rugby Tots as Katie, but she spoke to his son before I spoke to Johnny. I was like, "See, you know everybody as well." And it was just one of those like class thing, and I love that you can go to Murrayfield and you can bump into folk, and you know, there are folk that sit in the same seat and have the season pass and all that kind of thing. I've never been that guy, but I love that you're able to just bump into folk that you've not seen or folk you played with, or, you know, I love that. And that camaraderie just makes it feel safe. And that's why families are enjoying going, Rob.
What's funny is Gav has given me an answer that I'm going to nick from him and use whenever ever asks me. Now, the Jason White one that you mentioned there, I was racking my brains. I'm going to steal that. Jason White, for me, is one of the most underrated players. He's been too quickly forgotten. He was never underrated when he was Scotland captain, but he's been too quickly forgotten, in my opinion. He, as Gav said, he was magnificent. He was scary to watch him. He was brave. And you mentioned Gary Armstrong earlier on, Bruce, as well. He was brave. That was two things I love in rugby players. But certainly, my idea, to answer the question I put out there to begin with, I'd go what Gav has said, the Jason White performance, 2006, I think you said, Gav. He's my man.
I remember when Hodgie won the game single-handedly. He hates it when I say that.
He kicked 19 points. Was it 1913?
Well, he scored a try. And the forwards did all the hard work, and then he appeared and dived over the line. But Hodgie's so modest. And talking about folk that get forgotten quickly, I love Hodgie to bits. But I can remember having a ticket to that and saying to my then girlfriend, now wife, or were we married by then?
That's what you say.
I can remember walking to that saying, if somebody gives me face value, I'll sell my ticket, because it had been a hellish season. It was rubbish weather. And I was like, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure I can handle us getting caned. And we got there, and fireworks full. You couldn't see anything at the start because the mist wasn't going. I was like, what am I doing here? And then Hodgie pulls that one out. England thought they were going to win it in sort of true style of that era. And the downside to that performance was everybody forgot about how bad things were because we'd beaten England and won the Calcutta Cup, and all of a sudden we were the best in the world. But I was genuinely ready to sell that ticket.
Well, Bruce, I can better that story because in the book, this book.
Oh, have you written a book, Rob?
I've written a book, and it's incredible. There's a commentator section, and Andrew Cotter, who's a magnificent commentator.
Love that guy.
His grandfather played for Scotland, and he always got a ticket through his grandfather. And before the 1990 game, the Grand Slam one against England, he's probably and he writes this in the book, the only person that turned. He thought Scotland were going to get destroyed in that game to the extent he gave his ticket to his brother, I think he was, didn't go and played golf with his dad in Troon. And he said that's his biggest regret in rugby, passing that on and going and playing golf with brother. So at least you turned up, Bruce. Hi, Andrew Cotter.
Hey, I might not have been very good, Rob, but I tended to turn up like a bad penny. So the book, you've released it beautifully because now it becomes, well, pretty big stocking filler, but you've made it the easiest Christmas present to buy.
It seems to be going very well. It's I'm proud of it, if that's the right word, because as you say, it's really, really heavy as well. It's not like one of these cheap wee small books. It's hard to carry. It's big and it's great. And also 100 years next year, it's a perfect thing for ahead of the Six Nations, which, I'm assuming it'll get another plug. And also somebody, a magnificent rugby journalist described it. Can I read this, Bruce, please? It says...
I don't know, can you?
Yeah, it says, somebody wrote, a must-read, not just for fans of Scottish rugby, but the game as a whole. It perfectly encapsulates, that's a big word for him, all of the historic moments that have played out at the home of Scottish rugby, with those at the centre of the action helping tell the tale. Gavin Harper, rugby editor of the Herald.
Care of ChatGPT.
Bruce, it must be good. It must
be good.
I'm not going to lie, I'm feeling a bit left out there and they get asked to put a quote on there. I can't believe Gavin Harper got been asked.
He's in the middle. He's in the middle of it.
That's because Gavin Harper was turning up for the free pies and sausage rolls that Mr. Robertson was provided.
Exactly. I wouldn't have let him in. I mean, they're also glowing endorsements from Mark Palmer, Gavin Mears of the Telegraph, Rob Kitchen of the Guardian, who's an incredible guy, Tom English, David Barnes, Graham Bean, and James Price of the Rugby Journal, which is quite a magnificent publication, but I don't really see as much as I should.
It's amazing what bribery will do for you, Rob.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. I as I say, I bribed him with a sausage roll, and it worked. Great.
There's not much the big fella will not do for a sausage roll. Now you mentioned the pictures before, and you and I have spoken about this before, and I love a good picture. But again, we're back to photographs that there was no social media, there was no sky scanner, whatever it is, eye in the sky. These photographs are it. They're the visual record of these things.
Absolutely magnificent. Absolutely. I mean, some of the earlier pictures are just incredible. And they make them, it's the sort of thing you could sit there just looking at the pictures, forget about the words, just look at the pictures. Also as well, I don't know what Gav thinks, but one of my favourite pictures in the book is bizarrely a picture of Alan Lawson looking scarily running up the pitch. Just a full page. And if you're ever looking, Alan, I hope you're listening, if there is a person you didn't think would look scary running up a pitch, it's Alan Lawson. But it just shows what everybody gave to the jersey. Yeah. He looks like a marauding forward, despite the fact him being a try-scoring scrum half. So it just shows the quality of these guys and what it meant playing. There's also a great picture of Ian Paxton, who turned up at the launch as well, which is great. A whole page of Ian Paxton. It's one for the wall. But it just shows what it means for these people to play for Scotland, and also it means as well. I've never actually congratulated them, and Gav probably never has either. The photographers, we just think it's monkeys pressing a button. You think it's easy. I certainly think it's easy, but some of the pictures that they've taken are great. I mean, up to now, David Gibson's in the book. There's a few others. In the book. Craig Watson. There's some great pictures in there. And they've been captured superbly well by the photographers. I still think it's monkeys pressing a button, Gav, but not compared with what we do. But it's
exactly,
they're
Rob,
pictures.
exactly. Let's not talk them up too much.
No, exactly. That'll do them.
The stadium's changed massively. Terracing, it was open. It could be windy. The stadium's changed, and talking about being able to go on the pitch, and when you walk, I've been lucky. I've coached a couple of times there. Walking out the tunnel, I think I grow 10 feet when I get to walk out there, because it just feels amazing to be given that chance. But when you look back at certain games, and there is a bit of footage of them coming out, and now all the names are there, and the sponsors are there, and the slogans are there, and the sponsors are there now, and you think, it wasn't that long ago that they were running out and it was just concrete, and it was, there wasn't even any plaster on the wall. But they weren't any less motivated, and they weren't getting paid.
No,
that's the thing. These heroes, this kind of romantic idea that I think probably all three of us have. A lot of these games and a lot of these folk were at work on Monday morning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, John Beattie tells a story in the book that he was a site manager. And he got praised.
He tells this when he speaks at dinners, and it's gold.
Does he? Praised to high heaven. I'll sub it down. And he praised to high heavens beforehand. Comes back on the Monday, and even the girl in the canteen who's giving him his Empire biscuit is slagging him off. It was just. In fact, it was SECC he was building.
That's right.
And it's a case that back then there was maybe more connection with the fans nowadays compared with now. Because even Gavin, myself, you do meet players, but it's very much in an environment whereby the SRUPR controls them a wee bit. Whereas in the old days, actually, Jim Rennick would be back at work on a Monday morning. Roy Laidlow might be your electrician, just wander into your house on a Monday morning to sort your fuse box.
Are you old enough, Rob, to have travelled with the team?
No. That was before.
Am I right in saying Lee McKenzie's old man?
Yeah, Bob McKenzie. But the era that ended was when Derek Douglas was what Gav was doing now. Graham Law. That was Derek Douglas was saying he was the last one to kind of do that. But photography access, he said, was very different in there, in that they could just nip up. This sounds bizarre, but they could just nip up and go and knock on not knocking his door, you knock on a hotel door, but could phone reception and say, "Can I have Doddy Weir's room?" And say, "Can I have Doddy? Could you come down and do a picture?" Can you imagine that now? And Doddy would maybe come down. Or if they were going on a fishing trip, which they did a few times, Derek was saying that he'd gone on fishing trips in South Africa with the Scotland squad with Jim Galloway, who's the hero photographer at the time. And Jim would take pictures of, in fact, I've seen one of them in Derek's house, Rob Wainwright with a fish, a huge fish. Can you imagine that, Gav? Now, there's no chance we get away to do anything like that, That would be terrific.
No, wouldn't it just? I mean, the idea of Rob and I going fishing with Finn Russell seems unlikely.
Unfortunately, we would be hearing about that on the 6 o'clock news, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like a comedy show that I'd watch.
It does. That is very true. So, Rob, the book, obviously, you had the launch at Murrayfield. Pleased with how it all went, and great to have so many, Scotland legends in the same room.
Totally. I mean, that was the thing. What was humbling. This sounds me blowing my own trumpet. I don't like doing that. I don't like taking myself too seriously. But I just phoned them all up and they all turned up. I mean, that was really humbling. That was great. They didn't have to, but they all did. And especially, I was really pleased that Jim Rennick made it, because Jim Rennick phoned me the day before saying, "I'll have to call off, Rob. Really sorry, the exhaust falling off my car." And I said, "Jim, you can get that sorted." And then I thought, you live in Hoyt, maybe you can. But he went out his way and got it sorted the following day, and then just drove straight up and turned up with Andy Irvine, and which was terrific. A lot of these guys were, even Finlay Calder was there, which was great at the very end, who's one of my sort of scary heroes.
But that's another example, though. That to me, that's a different time. Although they came for the book, Jim and Andy probably hadn't spoken for however long, and they'll have picked up just like they did because Murrayfield means a lot to them. The game's given them a lot, and and unfortunately, we'll maybe not quite so much get it, but we're at a point now where you need a reason to meet up with folk, and you gave them a reason to meet up with folk.
We're lazy, can't be bothered.
Yeah. So for them to do that, and Jim's nose would be bothering him, and if it was free food and drink, Jim, I'm surprised didn't walk. But you're also talking about Jim Rennick at one point was potentially the best player on the planet.
Yeah,
Andy Irvine at some point was the best player on the planet. Like these are people that if you went to New Zealand and spoke to All Blacks, they would be able to tell you stories about these guys.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm not sure. Finn Russell's well respected, what a player, world class, but the romance has kind of gone because the access to them is so. We know everything about Finn. We know every mistake he's made and every pass he caught and every kick he missed. And whereas with Andy Irvine, it was literally the stuff of legends. You only knew about it because the stories were passed on, or you listened to Bill McLaren paint a picture on the radio, or like Bill Johnson. Like I feel Bill Johnson. It's a bit like Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen could have been the best basketball player in the world, but he was playing with Michael Jordan. Bill Johnson could have been the best commentator in the world, but unfortunately, Bill McLaren was there. And Bill's one of the most humble men on the planet. Like he's somebody you could sit and listen to. Their knowledge about not just the players, about coaching, about the game, about the tactics. They knew everything.
Well, it's funny you should say that because he's in the commentator section as well, and it was an absolute joy speaking to him and talking about how he used to go up over Sutra Hill in Bill McLaren's car. Bill would do the TV. In fact, the other Bill would do the radio as well. And his love of rugby came through when I went to meet him at Carefree Mill Hotel to discuss things. And the one asked him to name his favourite Scotland team, which I'm looking at a bit just now. But the one that fascinated me was his best player of all time. Now, this is a guy, I don't know how old Bill will be now, in his 80s maybe. I kind of thought he'd maybe go with a Gavin Hastings or somebody for the 60s, 70s. Finn Russell is his greatest ever Scotland player, which I didn't see coming. I'm not saying Finn Russell isn't. In fact, he probably is. But for a man of his generation, I never thought he would say Finn Russell.
Rob, just on that, what would your answer to that be?
See, Gavin Hastings. Gavin Hastings. Finn Russell, with all respect, it's a case of show me your medals.
Yeah.
Gavin Hastings, captain the Lions, played for the Lions, Grand Slam, top player, European, what do you call it, Scottish Claymores kicker. I'm just kidding with that one. But
reigning Five Nations champion.
Five Nations, and also I'll tell you as well, another guy who mentions in the book, who I think is most underrated, is a prop called Paul Burnell, who played in 1990 and also was in 1999.
There's another very humble man. Incredibly humble man.
And he's in the book as well. And you think to yourself, that's a prop that was in 1990 and 1999. Now, for a prop, back then, that's a long time to be at the top of your game. So, in answer to your question, Gavin Hastings by a long way, I think. I honestly can't see past him. What about you, Gav? Are you Jason White, or was that just a game?
I think that was a period of time where I think I'm unfortunately not old enough, despite my looks, to remember the kind of Grand Slam years and that era, which I think limits you somewhat.
Are you going to say Brendan Laney?
I'm not going to say Brendan Laney.
Please don't.
But I think for me to typified what it meant to play Scotland and play for Scotland and be in that same kind of Finlay Calder, Gary Armstrong, Greg Laidlaw type. I always am drawn to Tom Smith.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
Think of what he did for Scotland, but then like in '97 with the Lions, which is my very, very first rugby memory.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, I can see that.
Tom play against it, but then to go to Australia and do it 4 years later was just
that's
a remarkable achievement. Bruce.
I get massive bias, and this is a big part of why I love the game so much. So football was my first love, but I never really knew any of the folk that played for Hibs or for Scotland. So when one of your mates for school becomes Scotland's most capped player, and you see how hard Mossy worked, and he kicked every lunchtime. I loved that. Tooney was one of my brother's best mates at school, played Scottish school as my brother, and it was as trying to play his position. And you watch talking in 97 Lions, and Gregor wasn't a star of the DVD by any stretch, but a boy fra Gala down the road from me went to the same school, captained the first 15, so did I. So that when he won with the Lions in South Africa was my S6, and I was first 15 captain, like he'd been 6 years before me.
Bruce, what went wrong? What went wrong?
Well, some would say what went right, Rob, but those being able to get close, like I've got to know Gary Armstrong,
Okay.
and he's only grown in my estimations. The more, and sometimes I've got close to heroes, and sometimes it's disappointing me a bit. As a wee lad, I'm playing at Watsonians when I'm at uni in Edinburgh, and Scott Hastings comes out his contract with Edinburgh, turns up at training, and I'm sitting in the changing room getting changed next to Scott Hastings. I'm like, this is, he's a British Lion, and I'm for Stow. Like this is bonkers.
Come on, Bruce, don't do.
No, he's not. He didn't give me that rubbish. He's for Kelso. He lives in Stow because he passed the entrance exam. And the only reason we let him pass the entrance exam was he was able to show us his British Lion cap. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been allowed in because we didn't accept everybody. But those, like, to have met Bill McLaren, to have, to know Greg Laidlaw, to have, like, and then I got to meet Tom Smith, and I did a podcast with Tom Smith and Gav. You're right. I mean, what quiet, humble, and she'd never have played for the British Lions against the Springboks. Like that was
went in his fifth choice, didn't he?
But then, so in answer your question, just because I'm a wee boy, it would have been Gregor, because Gregor played in that position, had walked the same corridors as me. Mossy was a year above me at school. We were mates. We were good mates, and you saw how much he put into becoming what he became. But then there was, like, Gavin Hastings was an absolute man mountain. Finlay Calder, John Jeffrey in that back row were just like that I was lucky that I had that kind of romantic era where I would be along at the far end of Stow getting the pink newspaper on a Saturday night as the rugby buses were spilling out into the Royal Hotel for a beer, and you were seeing British Lions and international, like they walked among you. And if you were in the club rooms at Netherdale, they could have been playing for Scotland the week before, and they were playing for or against Gala, and like that. I missed that. I really missed that. And then I remember Brian Redpath was telling Collins and Gira at the Sevens, at Melrose Sevens last year, 2 years ago, and he was saying that Jim Telfer used to make them train on a Sunday morning at Melrose. And if you'd played for Scotland on the Saturday, you had to be at training on the Sunday, because Creamy said, they've got you into the Scotland squad. They've paid to watch you on the Saturday. You'll be at training on the Sunday. So Brush and Doddy and Hoggy and Sheesh and Chick and all those boys did their Saturday night, but they were at the Green Yards on Sunday, because if they weren't, they'd be hell to pay with Jim Telfer.
Sorry to interrupt. I've never forgive myself. I haven't mentioned when we were talking about greatest players. Can I throw in John Rutherford just to get? He was one of my heroes. He was at the launch as well.
John tells a brilliant story about the kids burying his IRB, as it was then, Player of the Year trophy. I think it was an Adidas golden boot, and the kids buried it in the back garden, and then couldn't remember where they buried it.
I hope he found it again.
I mean, and there's another one, like a guy for Selkirk. Was the best player in the world, official, given the award, best player in the world, but he was at work on a Monday morning.
That's right. That's my slight concern nowadays, and I think that's maybe why folk like Gavin, myself, reacted to Piloto and people like that. A lot of the problem with the current Scottish players is they don't have that hinterland that they did, that we were talking about back then. They just go straight into rugby. There's no backstory to them. Whereas folk like Sione comes from Australia, you've got the granny. They've got better stories, perversely now, than maybe a young Scottish guy who maybe goes to Hugh Melville, plays for Scotland under 18, plays for the main team. Gavin and I go and interview him, and he's really not got much to say. Not through any fault of his own, but just because he doesn't have much to say anyway, because nothing much has happened.
And there's another reason why the likes of Darcy, for what he can do on the pitch, but because a bit like me, I walk the same corridor as Chris Patterson and Gregor Townsend, and when I was head of PE at Hoyk High School, I was cleaning out a filing cabinet and I found a letter-headed paper, and on it had Rector Jim Telfer.
Did them day when you were head of PE at Hoyk, Bruce, come through? Like there's them doing the Scotland team just now that...
Nah, Darcy had just left. There was a few, so like Andrew Mitchell, who's playing for Hoyk now, was kind of, he thought he might. Fraser Rennick went away and played a bit of Super Six, and so right back when I so I've actually worked at Hoyk High School 3 times. I was there as a student teacher many moons ago in 2000. It would have been, and it was Graham Hogg, Rory Hutton, Craig Chart, a whole load of good lads.
Hutton was going to really go at the top.
Aye, and for whatever reason, but I was in Hong Kong for 4 years, came back to work in a school in Alloa called Lawrence Hill Academy, and I'll never ever forget Wednesday morning, core 4th year PE, football on the AstroTurf, and there's this absolute giant stood there. And I was like, look at the size of this kid. And he's called Grant Gilchrist, but he loved his rugby, and his old man was involved at the club, and his cousin was this wee dafty with a big De Monte earring, and he was a wee poser with a chain that he used to have to take into the valuables box, a kid called Sean Kennedy. And the two, and then we used to join with Alloa Academy for the cup. And we had some kid called Glenn Bryce, who was an absolute lunatic, and Stuart Edwards. So you had these 4 kids that have gone on to do pretty good things in different ways, playing with boys that are like Gary Taylor, Alloa captain, like nae Scotland caps, nae nothing, but he's played for Alloa for the last 20 years, I think, given a huge amount to Alloa. And I just, like you're saying, Rob, there's the backstory. Gary Taylor is able to tell folk that he played with Grant Gilchrist, Glenn Bryce, Stuart Edwards, Sean Kennedy. I went to school with Chris Patterson, and we've most folk have got those stories, and that's when you were able to go and watch them. It was just class. I mean, there was a wee bit of you out there, and you just loved that, or you still do. There's still some who get to claim that, but.
I mean, just on that, Bruce, as well, I'd love, and this is no disrespect to Doohan, and you maybe know where I'm coming from, I want Darcy Graham to be Scotland's top try scorer because of his more Scottish links. That's nothing deep against Doohan, but it'd be great. I just want him to do it.
But I think if we go back to Murrayfield memories, you look at people now, and kids now will have the same discussion about, remember when Darcy scored 4 tries against Fiji. Remember Doohan's hat-trick against England was the first ever in the Calcutta Cup last stop. So you think actually we maybe have these rose-tinted specs about
of course we do.
Here because
it was ours. It was ours.
Exactly. But
that's true.
When you look at people leaving Murrayfield and think, maybe in 20 years' time somebody will sit down and say, my favourite Scotland player ever was Hugh Jones or Sione or Finn.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So I think it's incredible important that we don't lose sight of what is in front of us while we kind of hold on to what we all had as individuals as well.
Gav, that was the deepest thing I've ever heard you say. That was brilliant. That's true.
I've thought about that for at least 2 minutes.
Gav, that is
he's needing his tea.
Brilliant. That is brilliant. That honestly, that does sum it up. That's exactly it. Write that down somewhere and getting a tattoo. That is absolutely right for the future of Murrayfield. That is what's happening. People will think of the Doohan hat-trick. We're maybe just too close to it just now. Yeah. It's still a wee bit fresh in our own mind. It's not part of history. It's all part of Scottish rugby present rather than Scottish rugby heritage. But you're right, that's going to go down in history.
You know, you both remember the days of the terracing. I don't, but I can remember when the stadium looked slightly different to it looks now. And I think that's the other thing that you know, you and I have talked about, Rob, is that now we need to see that kind of evolution again of how does Murrayfield as a venue and compete with, you know, all these enormous stadiums around the world that are kind of becoming more than just a place to go and watch two teams play. So it'll be interesting to see what Scottish Rugby do in that respect over the next few years.
They've certainly got a man on the board who redeveloped property in St Andrew's Square, so that there will be something happening. It's more a question when. I don't know what you think, Gab, but I'm thinking if they've got a £10.5 million deficit just now, will they leave it a couple of years? They'll certainly maybe do something pretty soon, but I think we'll maybe have to deal with that first and then come back to the stadium, which is fine because the stadium, it's got good memories, and if they pull down a stand or get more hospitality boxes, it kind of won't be the same. But as you say, I think we all look at this with rose-tinted glasses. But as Gav said, that Doohan try, and also I hope Gav or somebody helped me at the launch. I criminally forgot to mention Dr. James Robson. I had to go back on the mic and mention him later on, because you can't underestimate that final iconic image of him with a Calcutta Cup. I can't remember whose shoulders he was on, of players.
Pierre, I think, was it?
Was it?
Pierre,
that's right, Pierre Schumann. Yeah, the amount of work he'd done for Scottish Rugby through the years, he deserves that moment. And that's another moment that I'd like to think, as Gav suggested with the Doohan hat-trick, that people will remember the work that he's done for Scottish Rugby. And it was a fitting send-off for him, that being his his second final game, but his final game at Murrayfield.
Have you got anything in the book about Taylor Swift, Rob?
I've not. I mentioned Bruce Springsteen. I wasn't
did you? I was
Swift.
there. I was at that.
It was magnificent. And I did mention I was at the Rolling Stones, and also I went to see David Bowie in 1980, supported by the Icicle Works. You weren't at that, Bruce, were you?
I think I missed that one. I think I was learning to stand up then.
And also my daughter called off for Harry Styles.
I was there as well. That was the night before I run the marathon. That was my marathon prep. I went and watched Harry Styles, and then 2 days later, having run 26 and a bit miles and toenails falling off, decided it was a great idea to have standing tickets for Bruce Springsteen, who likes to spend 4 hours on the stage. So on the Wednesday, I was quite a happy camper.
Well, as I say, I've already got my ticket. I don't know. Maybe show me here, Gavin and Bruce, but I've already got my tickets for Bruce for Billy Joel as well next summer. So that's nice. Another one I'm going to see.
I upset somebody by telling them my favourite ever time at Murrayfield was the time I spent with Taylor Swift. It did not go down well. But
no, understandable.
Bruce,
the favourite time I spent at Murrayfield is when me and Gav are in the press box. He lied.
Oh, right, that's enough. Get a room, you two.
The segues here from Jim Rennick to Taylor Swift.
It's all there, isn't it? It's all there. And the Rolling Stones going in.
You didn't get this anywhere else.
You don't. Every week. It's well worth it. Well worth it. And next week, you guys will be talking about a Scotland win over South Africa.
Correct, and that'll be everybody's favourite game.
Oh yeah, probably. No. That's a discussion for another day.
He must have heard I was talking about him.
I can't see it. Who's that? Stuart Edwards. Stuart Edwards. God bless him.
He must be wanting something. Right, gents, great to see you, Rob. Let's see this book again.
How are you doing it? There you go. Look at that. It's so big. This is
Murrayfield.
It's taken both my hands to hold it up to the camera.
Do you know what I love? We've been recording for 54 minutes.
Look at Gav Harper's one in the middle. I don't know if you can see that.
We've been recording for 54 minutes and nobody's mentioned Pete Burns. So I think it's time to finish.
Right. And Pete Burns. Pete, hello, sorry. There's Andy Nichol. Look at that. Look at these lovely pages. And just saying that, Pete Burns did a magnificent job. Look at that. That was his layout, his idea of the pictures. They're absolutely magnificent pictures. There's another great picture.
Rob, stop it. Otherwise, folk are not get bothered buying it because they've seen it all.
That's true. That's true. One more time. Look at that old-fashioned one as well. That's about right. That's about it. There's Bruce Aitchison playing there. It's that old.
Steady, 71. Rob, an absolute pleasure.
very quickly before Bruce wraps up, tell people where they can get the book.
They can get the book. They've got its own wee stand in Amazon in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and they've got a wee writing thing about it as well. And they rate it that highly. They've given it its own wee stand, which is great. Thank you, Watersons. And it's also on Amazon as well. So there is no excuse. It's well worth it, honestly. And I'm not just, well, I'm
It is
probably
well
just saying
worth
that.
it. Having read it cover to cover, I can confirm it is well worth the money.
There you go. There you go,
Can
Bruce.
anybody,
What can you
can
say?
anybody else smell that for Gav?
His
I
backing
didn't realise
himself
this.
up.
Didn't
See, he's
realise
got
this
that in
was
the back cover. He has
smell-o-vision.
to say that now. You can't
Didn't
say it's
realise
rubbish
this
now.
was smell. He started signing copies. He's
He has, isn't he? I
devaluing
know,
them. 'Cause
exactly.
he's signing the back.
It's a bit like the Daz advert, Bruce. It's now as recommended
Aye.
by Gav Harper.
Gentlemen, an absolute pleasure. Rob, I love it. I think that this conversation may well continue, but we'll let the listeners and viewers disappear. Gav, always good. Thank you for hosting and letting me and Rob have that chance. It's a class book, Christmas presents galore. It's going to be winging its way all around the world. Well, probably not, because it'll cost a fortune because it weighs a ton. But,
no, Amazon, you're fine.
Oh, all good bookshops and even some bad ones. This is Murrayfield. Rob Robertson and his mate Pete Burns. Gav, love it. Good to see you. Catch you soon. Rob, good to see you. Let's speak soon, my man.
Thank you. Good night.